is one of our best of British, Muazzam Beg, who spent years in Guantanamo Bay as a kidnapped victim of American and British imperial policy, and who has, since his release and return to this country, tirelessly worked for other caged prisoners like he once was. And of course, all of us are horrified, I think I can say on behalf of all of us, though we all come from different political backgrounds and perspectives. I think I can say on behalf of all of us, that we are all horrified by the secret courts idea. The very idea of secret courts is redolent of Guantanamo Bay, even if our victims will not be sent to Guantanamo Bay. The very idea that justice should not just be done, but be seen to be done as being a crucial safeguard in this country for 1,000 years almost, where the idea of trying people in secret, the idea of an absence of habeas corpus, the legitimate demand to the state that they produce a person and justify their deprivation of his or her liberty. These are core values in any democracy, and they have been, despite all the vicissitudes of recent years, they have been and remained a core value of the English legal system. I have little faith in Parliament. I have little faith in the House of Commons, little faith in the House of Lords, but I had and have still some faith in the courts and the justice system as being, as I've said before, one of the last uncorrupted parts, relatively speaking, of the unwritten British Constitution. So when the government proposed, in the name of national security, to introduce secret justice, secret courts, people from all political persuasions, the Right Honourable David Davis, for example, is leading the opposition here in the House of Commons, a man not just a Conservative, but on the right of the Conservative Party. This is something that isn't party political. It's about whether you believe that justice has to be fought for and defended or not, irrespective of one's political point of view. I just wanted to add one other point, really, because the other speakers are more expert on this matter than I. And it may seem like a bit of a stretch, but I don't believe that it is. When I saw the recent report of the inquiry into the Hillsborough disaster, where 96 football fans were killed and then slandered by the state and its echo chambers in the media, when I read that inquiry report, when I contemplated what it actually means that the police systematically falsified the truth in literally hundreds of cases, 168 statements systematically falsified by the police, including allegedly at a high level. And the fact that that was covered up for 23 years and would have remained a secret if it were not for the campaigning, zeal, fortitude, courage of the families of the 96 football fans, then it struck me this is what secret courts would be like. One would never know the truth, and it would be legal this time to cover those truths up. So we're here in Parliament, which, if it means anything, must mean that this is the place to defend liberty, this is the place to defend democracy, this is the place to defend justice, and that's why we decided to have this event here. But it is a press conference, not a public meeting. I've probably spoken for long enough. Yvonne Ridley, journalist, broadcaster, campaigner for justice and human rights. Sister Yvonne.
Right. Salam alaikum and welcome to everyone here. George has mentioned the Right Honourable David Davies of the Conservative Party. Unfortunately, he's overseas, but he's very passionate about fighting the prospect of secret courts coming into the British system, and I'm sure that he would have been here. The Liberal Democrats, as you know, are having their annual conference, and they're actually discussing the issue of secret courts today while this press conference is going on. And the Labour MP for Paul Flynn is adding his full weight to the Cage Prisoners campaign, No More Secrets. Flynn, a politician who despises all the corrosive elements surrounding secrecy, was ordered to leave the House of Commons debating chamber just a few days ago. He was suspended from the Commons after comparing statements given by the Defence Secretary and his ministerial team to the First World War, when politicians lied and soldiers died. The experience of being suspended from the British Parliament has certainly not silenced the Newport West MP, who congratulated Cage Prisoners for the campaign, and he has issued a statement to be read out today. He says secret courts are a throwback to the neurotic secrecy of the past, which was designed for concealing injustices. This is not a time for a denial of information, and the recent trend is for more openness and transparency. I welcome this latest initiative by Cage Prisoners and give my full support. And it's wonderful to have Natalie Bennett here, the leader of the Green Party. So you can see, as George said, this is not a political issue. But the purpose of being here today is so that Cage Prisoners can launch its No More Secrets campaign to prevent people in positions of power hiding behind legislation and misusing the rule of law. This coalition government is working on proposals to overturn more than 800 years of legal convention by introducing secret courts into Britain. Following the fallout from the Hillsborough tragedy, Cage Prisoners believes now more than ever is the time for transparency rather than more secrecy. Hillsborough taught us how corrosive and toxic secrecy can be. It allowed people in positions of trust to weave a web of lies and deceit, while entire communities were demonised and the dead were slandered. 3 decades on, and we salute the courage and determination of those who fought for justice, but their battle continues and may even end with the prosecution of those accused of lying and misleading the public. This is just one of the reasons Cage Prisoners has launched today's campaign, and it is probably our most ambitious since we called for the closure of Guantanamo Bay. Way back then, we were a lone voice, but the Close Gitmo campaign continued in the face of fierce opposition, and now there is an international chorus of calls for an end to this legal limbo, this gulag, as Amnesty International once called it. Virtually every leader in the Western world wants to see Guantanamo closed, and even former US President George W. Bush agrees with us. Guantanamo should be closed. Happily, today's campaign launches with an impressive amount of support already. We're very grateful that Respect MP George Galloway is hosting today's press conference from Westminster Hall, the home of British democracy. And we are joined by quite an array of speakers. Their voices of disapproval over government plans to introduce secret courts are already building in momentum. Cage Prisoners intends to lead the call for an end to this ill-conceived piece of legislation, which many fear is a product produced on the back of US pressure. This isn't the first time the USA has tried to meddle with British law and impinge on British sovereignty. The very one-sided US extradition treaty is a case in example. Among those expressing concern is Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister and Liberal Democratic leader, who is on record as saying that the security services cannot be allowed to ride roughshod over the principles of open justice. And Lord Ken MacDonald, the former Director of Public Prosecutions, is more concerned about government ministers using secret courts to hide awkward or embarrassing moments, citing national security as the reason. Call me cynical if you want, but if senior police, politicians and others in a position of trust lied during Hillsborough, imagine the abuse of power stemming from secret courts. If any of the Hillsborough evidence had been heard in secret courts, those families in Liverpool today would still be searching for the truth. Justice is for everyone and not the privileged few. Kenneth Clarke, the former Justice Minister, insisted earlier this year that these proposals are designed to allow the government and secret services fight compensation claims against them by having sensitive national security evidence heard in closed sessions. At present, the government settles out of court instead of exposing such information to the public domain, he says. This is something I've no doubt will be expanded upon by Moazzam Begg, who has been compensated for his kidnap, rendition and torture in Guantanamo Bay. I'm not sure what he'll say, but I'm confident that he would have welcomed a hearing in an open court. The truth is that the government wanted to shelter and protect the misdeeds of some very powerful people in very powerful places. If there is evidence of wrongdoing by these powerful people, then the British public has a right to know. Ask any member of the Hillsborough campaign and they will tell you that transparency is the best disinfectant for lies. Secret courts will serve only to protect the guilty, whether they are in Whitehall or Capitol Hill. Secret courts will deny justice to the common man while giving a coward's cloak of anonymity to those who should be brought to account. And as those of you who watch the documentary Live Spies in Libya will note, this does go to the very top, it goes to the very heart of the establishment. It's a hard-hitting film which exposes, among other things, the UK government's complicity in rendition, torture and kidnap. And one of the sequences reveals details of a medieval water wheel which was used in torture sessions by the Americans. We've all heard about waterboarding, but this water wheel, which was used in Bagram, is revealed for the first time. The film, commissioned by Cage Prisoners, will be shown at every venue selected for the nationwide tour, and its message is very clear as it is today: no more secrets. Thank you. Now, if I can invite Natalie Bennett, the leader of the Green Party, to speak. We're all waiting for your words, Natalie.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me here today. And thank you everyone who's made the time to come here today to support this campaign. The fact is, with this one bill, the so-called Justice and Security Bill, the government is seeking to tear up centuries of legal protections and important legal principles. Closed justice, not open to the scrutiny of the media or the public, is no justice at all. And these closed courts further undermine an absolutely critical principle of the British legal system, that everyone is equal before the law, because what it's doing is putting the government above the law. And we have to look at the context in which this is all happening. You have to consider that it's happening while we're having an utterly indefensible privatisation of the coercive force of the state in terms of the police, the jails and the military, leaving those services utterly further unaccountable to the public, to the politicians. It's clear overall that this government, and it's very sad that this government contains the so-called Liberal Democrat Party, is an absolute threat to our basic rights and civil liberties that people have fought for and died for over the centuries. The fact is, there's absolutely no evidence that there's any need to curtail our liberties in this way. Ministers have not been able to put forward one single example of a case that hasn't been able to proceed because evidence wasn't able to be presented. There's simply no evidence that's necessary. And also, we're looking at the Leveson inquiry, the whole context of that, the fact that up and down the country, senior police officers are facing very serious accusations and some have been convicted. It's more important than ever that evidence is open to public scrutiny. Now, the fact is, of course, we're moving here from the criminal law to the civil law. We're having a creeping of an utterly indefensible principle. And in fact, a question was asked in Parliament in January 2010 about how many times the secret courts and secret advocates and secret evidence were being used. And at that time, there were 21 different contexts in which the government admitted you could use all of these secret provisions. Once this starts, it creeps outwards. It starts in one place and then it starts to be used there, and it threatens every single person and every single person's liberties. Now, within the Green Party, Caroline Lucas, our MP, has spoken out very strongly on these issues, as has Jean Lambert, our MEP for London, who wrote an article that I'd urge you might find interesting in a journal called Archers, addressing the whole issue of secret trials. And in that she said that as leader of the EU delegation to South Asia, she found it really very difficult. She was going to countries and asking them about their human rights record and asking them about the way in which trials were not being properly conducted. And they could turn round, or even they didn't even have to turn round. She knew that she was coming from a place where trials were no longer being openly conducted before full scrutiny. And if you look at some of the reasons that floating around that are suggested as why we should be doing this, go back to the UN's Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, and it says that respect for human rights and the rule of law is essential for fighting terrorism. The fact is, these rights need to be there, they have to be there, and it's what we're supposed to be defending. And as both George and Yvonne have already said, and Caroline Lucas has also said, the real concern is not national security, but national embarrassment. They're concerned about what might come out, and what they can do by using secret trials is pushing this under the carpet. They want to close off the route by which we found out about the government complicity in torture and rendition. And the other important factor here, this is going to close off the rights of potential victims and their families to seek answers or reparations in the courts. If they don't actually know the evidence being held against them and how it's collected, there's no possibility of getting a reparation or return for that. So the fact is, as George said, we're now in what's often known as the mother of all parliaments, a place where many of the rights that are now enshrined in UN law were first encoded and first established. It is really tragic and sad that they're under threat here, but the positive message is, as Yvonne said, there's resistance to this right across the political spectrum. There's people who are going to stand up for our human rights here in Britain, for the right to a fair, open trial. And I congratulate all of you on joining them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Natalie. And before I go to Moazam, I'm going to let the lawyer speak now and give us the legal implications and perspective for this. Sagir Hussain.
Thank you, Yvonne, Natalie and George. I'll leave most of the things to my colleague Moazam to conclude with, but I feel it's necessary just to say a few words on the impact this bill, this proposed bill, is likely to have on our judicial system. One, on the confidence we have in the judiciary itself, the judges, and secondly, the impact it will have on how the cases are run. We at Cage Prisoners do feel that we have some expertise in this field, as we have been monitoring the development of the laws, what we call the Guantanamo laws, the laws whereby the secrecy is paramount, and it's normally accepted that most of the evidence against individuals cannot be aired in public. This has been embedded in one particular piece of legislation which brought in the Special Immigration Appeals Commission. And if you look at the way Special Immigration Appeals Commission has been run and the impact it's had in people's confidence in the judicial process, that's a way forward to see what could possibly happen if this bill becomes law. And so it's not really the first time the concept of open justice has been attacked. It's been going on for a number of years, particularly more in the cases of since the war on terror supposed to be started. Now, as somebody who's worked with the SIAC cases and dealt with the judges, dealt with the special advocates, dealt with the lawyers, I can tell you this, that the judges themselves feel pressurized and are left, as the special advocates said in their suggestions, in their representations to the Home Affairs Select Committee on this matter, it's almost like a straitjacket for them. They really have no option but to do what the government, what the Secretary of State is going to tell them. Now, that, of course, has severe implications for the whole concept of separation of powers and the whole concept of rule of law, whether a independent judiciary is able to hold to account an executive which may or may not be working properly or haven't scrutinized the legislation properly. Those judges themselves have no real option. Now, I know that they haven't come out publicly, and it's not normal for judges to speak publicly, but certainly the special advocates, group of them, in their representations to the Select Committee actually said that this is a total attack on the concept of open justice. They do not believe and they do not accept the assurances, even if they are coming from Kenneth Clarke, they do not accept the assurances given by the government that the judges will be in charge. The judges will not be in charge. Judges will be pressurized. They are human beings. They have careers, and they have their own sensitivities. And when you have a powerful government, powerful individuals, in the privacy of a room, going to a judge and imposing on them, it really is, imposing on them a certain viewpoint, I bet no judge, or at least very few judges, would feel comfortable in resisting that pressure from the executive. That is what we're looking at. That is the norm that we're seeking to sort of normalize in this country if this bill goes through. Now, the other point that comes through from the SIAC proceedings, and this is dealing with various individuals who have been, who's had to go before the SIAC judges, is that they feel, and I know this is cynical, and perhaps if my liberty or my life was dependent on these secret proceedings, I may well feel the same. But certainly this kind of opinion they're coming out with says that they do not believe the special advocates serve their interest. They believe the special advocates and the judges are simply there, part of the conveyor belt, just to show this pretense of due process. They're just legitimizing a very, very unfair system of laws, and therefore they do not believe that they've been subjected to a judicial system that's been fair. Now, we have, with this justice bill, if it goes through, this cynicism, this anger, and this disrespect for the law likely to spread to the whole country. If anybody's interested in finding out a bit more about individual clients who had this experience, or other further details, I'm available for discussion afterwards. Thanks very much, Yuan.
Thank you, Sagir Hussain. And last but by no means least is Moazzam Beg. And I think we're all very interested to hear what he has to say about the whole concept of secret courts. Moazzam?
Good afternoon, assalamu alaikum. Secret evidence, secret courts, secret justice. I would never have thought 2012, after having faced and been subjected to secret courts and secret evidence and secret justice in Guantanamo, that we'd be discussing this in the British House of Parliament today. It didn't make sense. There was something in Guantanamo called the Combatant Status Review Tribunals that were held in 2004. I received a letter from my lawyer, Gareth Pearce, at that time when I was in a cell that measured 8 foot by 6 foot. Do not take part in these hearings. They are not acceptable. They are secret courts, and you will not get to see the evidence there against you. They also had in these places something called the personal representative, which I see is an equivalent almost of the special advocate, that they will be arguing on your behalf, but they don't know what your behalf is because you don't get to see that evidence. Now, the reason I think it's very important to know why we're here, why is there a justice bill being passed? And I can tell you, it was a very odd meeting that took place between former Guantanamo prisoners, 15 of them on one side, and various members of the government on the other side. It was the oddest meeting you can possibly imagine. But this was what was happening after the British government had been taken to court by us for complicity in torture, false imprisonment, and rendition. What had happened was that after the government had spent tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money fighting against us to say that they were not involved in this torture, after the documents were disclosed in court, some very heavily redacted, that showed very clearly that the British government knew exactly what was happening to us, why it was happening to us, and who was doing it, that they sued for peace, that they sued for a settlement, and they said that we don't want to fight this anymore, and we will offer you an X amount of compensation. But there was a caveat, and the caveat was this: if you don't take this, we will be introducing a new bill into Parliament. And that bill will allow for such cases not to be heard in future except in secret. That's why we're here. And if you want to understand, as has been said by other speakers, that this indeed is in the civil courts. We're talking about the civil courts. But there were 3 actions taking place simultaneously. One was that David Cameron had ordered an inquiry into the treatment of detainees. And that fell on its head because it was boycotted by everyone, the prisoners, the former prisoners, the lawyers, the human rights group and so forth, because it wasn't going to be clear and transparent, because it was going to have an element of secrecy that we would never get to see evidence from those intelligence officers who we either saw physically beating us, like in the case of Shakar Amir, whose head was physically smashed against the wall in Bagram while MI5 watched, or in the cases of others like myself who were sent to Guantanamo because the MI5 had given false information to the Americans. And it was this that was the secrets that they wanted to prevent coming out in the open. And it was for this reason that the inquiry ended in the end, and also because a police investigation for the first time in the history of this country was taking place. Police officers had come to speak to us, not to ask us if we were terrorism suspects, but to ask us what crimes had been committed against us by our own government, for the first time in the history of this country. They were unable to conclude their proceedings or their investigations in the case of Binyam Mohammed for lack of cooperation. But something else happened then. The rebels in Libya stormed the headquarters of the Mukhabarat, or the intelligence agencies. And therein they found documents that incriminated directly British intelligence and the government for the handing over and rendition of at least 2 individuals, all based on secret evidence. But not only that, the SIAC, that Sergei Hussein was referring to, the Special Immigration and Appeals Commissions, where did they get their secret evidence from to begin with? Again, the answer was in the hands of the rebels who'd stormed the headquarters of Gaddafi's Mukhabarat, or intelligence services. They found the names of all of these men who were placed on control orders here in the UK in those documents. And the level to which this is taking place is astounding. Recently, I took a trip to Syria a couple of months ago. And upon my entry there, I met a Libyan individual. And he told me that he used to live in Syria. And what happened was that he was detained in Syria and then sent to Libya. But why? A phone call was made by one of the Libyan dissidents here in the UK to his friend, to the same Libyan man, while he was living in Syria. That phone call was intercepted by MI5 and had it handed over to Syrian intelligence. He was then detained, beaten, tortured, and sent to Libya and held in the same prisons where all of these other individuals were held. So the story of all of this secrecy, as reported in The Guardian today, is not about national security, though that's what the government will always claim. It's about national and international embarrassment. It's about trying to hide the truth when the truth is staring us all in the face. And it's about trying to, it's important to remember that the names that they've mentioned here, and as in the report that the government has internally discussed, that The Guardian has mentioned today, it says that the likely recipients of this secret hearings are going to be black and Asian men of Muslim origin. So in the climate of this Islamophobia that exists, in the climate of what's taking place all around the world, does it make sense that Britain would regress back into the Dark Ages and try to hold in secret what everybody knows is taking place? Britain, one of the things that happened to me when I was in Pakistan, when I was kidnapped with a gun put to my head in the middle of the night in front of my wife and kids, my family, my wife, went to the Pakistani courts, and they had issued in the Pakistani courts a habeas corpus writ that I be either produced to the court or I be released. Habeas corpus, where did that come from? That, as an idea, was exported from this country to the rest of the world, and you'll find it in the constitutions of Kenya, New Zealand, and America, and Pakistan. So how could it be that we will try to introduce secret evidence into courts here, the likes of which were introduced in Guantanamo and elsewhere, and then somehow claim to be the bastions of civilization and freedom and justice, when everybody knows that that can't be possible with the introduction of laws like this. So this is why my organization, Caged Prisoners, is fighting, and we believe this is a continuance of the fight to close Guantanamo, to stop secret prisons, to stop secret evidence, secret justice, if there's such a thing, and secret courts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moazam, articulate and eloquent as ever. Well, we can now throw it open to the media, although I suspect with the TV cameras, most of you will want to do one-to-ones with the speakers. But if anybody has any questions that they want to ask now? Yes?
You mentioned very briefly about the film that is going to be shown. Could you just provide a bit more detail about what it's about?
Yes, the documentary which has been commissioned by Caged Prisoners is called Lies, Spies and Libya. And as Moazam touched on, a lot of intelligence came out of Libya during the revolution. Ironically, we have to thank NATO bombs for opening the doors to the head of Libyan intelligence's officers, and their various documents were found, and the film Lies, Spies and Libya is based on the content of the intelligence documents found in Libya, but it also exposes several other incidents of British intelligence complicity in the US rendition and torture programme. For instance, for the first time, the documentary will reveal about an interrogation which took place between British intelligence and a detainee in the US rendition programme, and that interrogation took place in Morocco. We have another eyewitness account from a former Libyan commander who was arrested and tortured in Saudi Arabia. And the questions that he was asked could only have been provided by British intelligence. And Moazzam also referred to the Libyans who were on control orders in this country. We, as journalists, weren't allowed to know their identity. We were told we have to protect their identity. You will only know them as A and B and C and D, because there are some very bad people in the Gaddafi government who want to know who these people are, and we need to protect their identity. So the detainees on the control orders were all anonymous. We found a document in Moussa Koussa's office, the head of Libyan intelligence, from British intelligence saying A is so-and-so, B is, and British intelligence handed over the identities of these men with their corresponding letters. So the very people that they thought that they were being protected against actually knew who every single control order detainee in this country was, courtesy of British intelligence. And we've all seen the craven letter written by Sir Mark Allen, who refers to Abdul Hakim Belhaj as cargo, and very excited, you know, that he wanted to make sure that Moussa Koussa, the head of Gaddafi's intelligence apparatus, knew that Abdul Hakim Belhaj was delivered to him, not thanks to the Americans, but thanks to British intelligence. And he said, don't forget how we helped you. He even boasts about it. There are lots of new revelations that come out in this film. I'm amazed we haven't been injuncted yet, but who knows? It will be shown, inshallah, at every event that Cage Prisoners is holding on the No More Secrets tour. Details of that will be unveiled. And the No More Secrets campaign is an ongoing campaign. It's not just targeting the government over its secret courts legislation. We are going to hold to account the British government and the establishment for every attempt they do to deceive and manipulate and distort things under this secrecy campaign, which is turning Britain into a state of secrets. And as we've heard from this distinguished panel, now more than ever is the time for transparency, not secrecy.
I've got a quick one, just by means of clarification. This bill is debated in October. What happens after? And is it possible that this could be squeezed through, but by leaving the secret courts angle to be discussed at a later time, or does it all come together as one part of this legal system?
Well, a lot of that remains to be seen. As I say, just today, the Liberal Democrats are discussing the contents of that bill. There are eminent people in the Conservative Party, including the Right Honourable David Davis, who is wholly against this legislation. And George, do you want to add on this, how the timescale will unfold and how?
Well, it's in the parliamentary programme. Parliament's on holiday again, of course. But when we come back, it's in the programme. It will have to proceed through both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. It remains to be seen whether sufficient Conservative rebels and sufficient Liberal Democrat rebels can be won to our side to see whether or not this can be stopped in the House of Commons. If it is not stopped in the House of Commons, I expect it to be delayed considerably in the House of Lords, but the government are determined to press ahead with it. And of course, in the end, the government usually prevails. So it's a very real and present danger to liberty in this country. We're blessed with quite wide unity from different points of view here today, and other allies who couldn't be here today are also with us. So there will be a battle royal in Parliament over this, and David Davis will be the leader of it in the Commons. And I expect people with a judicial background, with a legal background, will lead the opposition to it in the House of Lords.
And it's also worth remembering, as Mozam touched upon, there is an unprecedented police investigation underway now. I'm not sure, Mozam, if that will be affected by this legislation.
I don't believe so. I mean, they're of course watching it very carefully. They speak to us quite regularly. They are now, I believe, in the process of actually going to Guantanamo for the first time, if they are allowed to go, to meet with Shakir Armour, who of course said that he was beaten in the presence of MI5. They've already spoken to Abdul Hakim Bilhaj, the person who was renditioned to Libya, as well as Samir Saadi. So that's taking place, and I think that they are in process and they can't stop that investigation. Just one more point I'd like to make. In relation to this bill, the documents here discussed by The Guardian, in which they say that the likelihood of the people being affected by this legislation is black and Asian Muslims, or North Africans, Asians, and so forth, would suggest to me that, well, they're the minority anyway, so who's going to care? And this is something we have to be extremely, extremely wary of, because it's this sort of statement, this sort of logic, which would allow this to go through if it's not for people like those that are seated on this table, and others, I'm sure.
But isn't that legislation also designed to protect white men in grey suits? Right. Any more questions?
Well, may I just add on that point? You make a good and witty joke there, but the 96 who perished at Hillsborough, so far as I know, were all white, and none of them was a Muslim. But that didn't stop the state using secrecy, in this case the police arm of the state using secrecy to cover up the truth. So that's why I raised the Hillsborough thing, which is, I did concede it's on the face of it a little bit of a stretch, but actually it's about secrecy. It's about the state abusing power in secret. And of course, as Francis Bacon once said, this secrecy is the arrow that flies in the night. By definition, you can't see it because it's secret. You don't know, therefore, that it's happened. So how can you oppose it? And these are key things to win liberal and centrist allies too, and even traditional conservatives who, though they may have right-wing views on other things, nonetheless believe in the rule of law and liberty. So I feel that we can build, and a caged prisoner is going to be an important part of this, I feel that we can build a lot of opposition to this measure. My lack of faith, which I confessed to earlier, in the current Parliament, and indeed some parliaments before it, is such that I don't know if it can be stopped, but I do know that we have to try.
Anybody else? Right, well, that concludes the press conference. The panel is available to give one-to-ones for the TV, and the next stage of the campaign will go out on the Caged Prisoners website, which is www.cagedprisoners.com, and there's some literature at the back about the campaign, and it will be ongoing, and it will be looking at all aspects of secret courts and attempts at secrecy, to introduce secrecy into legislation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.